you will realize that the first dimension is the consciousness itself, and this consciousness allows the higher consciousness in the fifth dimension to see the process of everything that the first one will express. And then the seventh dimension is the highest vibration of all that connect the whole process through the laws of the universe. So first, fifth, and seventh dimension will be the trinity to understand the consciousness of the being. Then the second dimension will multiply in the fourth and the eighth. The second dimension will be the positive and negative to see the outside. So the fourth dimension will bring you the process of time in which you can see every positive and negative, every mirror of the time, and then through the eighth dimension, understand the whole process of consciousness of every single time that you have created in the universe to see yourself from many different directions. So that's the trinity of time, 2, 4, and 8. And then you have the trinity of matter and the trinity of creation. The trinity of creation is 3, 6, and 9. We, as human beings, are in the third dimension. This third dimension is a structure in between past, present, future. And we are conditioned by these times and these spaces. But then you have to multiply the third dimension, and you will have the sixth dimension. When you find the sixth dimension, you will know that you can transform your past, you can transform your present, you can transform your future. The three of them just in one reality. You become like an alchemist in the sixth dimension to transform this reality in the third dimension. And then you have the ninth dimension. The ninth dimension will show you the purpose of the whole process of experimentation in the third dimension. That's why we are so connected with the ninth dimension, that help us to understand why we are here. And that's why we need the image of God or someone that helps us to understand why we are here. Because we are straight connected to the ninth dimension. This is not a problem that people in the second, in the fourth, in the eighth dimension or seventh dimension have. These are not problems that are wondered in those dimensions. Only beings in the third and the sixth dimension are asking and feel the presence of God, because we are exactly the projection of that divine here in matter. As the second, the fourth, and the eighth dimension are the trinity towards time and space, and the energy that flows in between time, the third dimension, the sixth dimension, and the ninth dimension will allow us to go through every time and space and unite them all in just one reality, which is the void. The everything is in the third dimension, the void is in the ninth dimension, and the sixth dimension is the bridge in between both of them that help us realize that the only way you can transform the reality in the third dimension is if you become void to create new realities. That's why 3, 6, and 9 are so important for us to understand, that are the key to transform every reality. So everyone kind of know inside the importance of those numbers. We order these dimensions in numbers from the 1 to the 9 because we need to organize the separation of things, because we're in the third dimension. But as I said, the 9 dimensions are not specific ordered by numbers, but by geometry. So by geometry, we can understand that the third dimension is the structure of time and space to being lived here, and is the dimension where the trinity of the universe has created a being that we call spirit, soul, and body. That's why in the third dimension is the only dimension where you can actually live the three of them in just one. That's why the three is so important, because it's our mind, our emotion, and our will, our action, all together in just one being. This being have to look for the coherence in between the three of them, and that's why when in our lives are asked to be coherent, we will start to see three in every moment of our lives. The three starts to repeat itself once and again. Three, 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 three. And it starts to call ourselves to be connected to the trinity of ourselves, to be coherent with ourselves. That's why also in the past they they did this path of recognition of the whole being as different grades in which you should understand every stage of the universe till you can transform the universe. That's why some orders had this grade 33, or the age where Jesus was transcendent, the 33. 33 is just a code in which someone from the matter realize how to transform itself through the matter. So these numbers are calling us all the time to remember us that we have to become gods on earth. And that's why it was so important for some masters to die at the 33, or to transcend at the 33, or to teach at the 33, because it's just a code. It's not a number per se. It's a code in between one trinity, which is negative, and the other trinity, which is positive. When they just connect, you have what we call the Merkaba. Merkaba starts to turn the energy from positive and negative, creating these tetrahedrons of Trinity, like the wheels of creation of the being. And once you have this creation, you realize about the six. The six is really important because it's the one that moves the realities. That's why 66, 666 used to be the numbers of transformation. What happened with this number? A lot of people is scared about the six because the six means death. The six means the destruction. Why? Because to be another being, you have to destroy what you have become. You have to forget who you are in order to be another being. You have to let go every reality you have created or you have believed in to be another being. So that's why a lot of people used to say that in order to be safe in this reality and to be happy in this reality, you should fear the numbers 666. You should fear the six because it's the number that will change your life. It's a number that will make you die, or that will transform yourself in such a way that you will forget about yourself. So according to this, the sixth dimension is just the one that enlightens yourself to be your own creator. And that's why through the story and history, we had all these people that they didn't want you to realize that you were able to contact the energy of God to yourself to transform your own reality. That's why they make you fear about the number six. Then you will find the nine, which also can be repeated in 99 or 999. And this is the number of God. This is the number of the whole, and is the number of the transcendence of every reality that you have created before. That's why we are so bounded and connected to these three numbers, because we are the Trinity that are meant to go to the divine. Our religions create this idea of someone or something that is bigger than us. Since thousands of years ago, we had this knowledge within that we were heading towards some special spot in the universe where God, Allah, or whoever you want to call it, exists, because it's the place where you are meant to go. So even the smallest human being in this planet kind of know that there exists something above or in or out or inside that is much powerful than we are, and we call God. But it's not outside, neither within. It's just the construction of every reality outside and within. And when we say it's bigger than us, it's not because we are smaller, it's because we are just a projection of itself. So we cannot see the whole picture that the reality of the ninth dimension can see. So naturally, we have this idea of something bigger than ourselves, that of something that holds the whole universe. But in order to get there, we have to forget the universe. We have to forget what we believe of the universe. That's why it's important for you to know what is the ninth dimension. Because at the moment you will find yourself in front of the ninth dimension, it's possible that you cannot feel anything. You cannot feel joy. You cannot feel anything in your body. You cannot feel any thought. You will be just nothing. And people fear nothing, fear void, fear the shadow, because it's totally opposite to what we were taught about God. What is amazing about the ninth dimension is exactly that when you go to the ninth dimension, when you feel the ninth dimension, and suddenly you feel all that void and emptiness, and you just feel that there's nothing exists. There is only one thing that you could do, that you will realize that you are thinking, and that the only thing that exists there is your thought of what is this and who am I? And that's the goal of the ninth dimension, to realize that the only thinking in the universe is you. And that's God. When you realize that the only creator that exists is just one, and you are it. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I am your host and guide, Matias Estefano, for this series on the creation of the universe. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we will dive into the spheres of life and the first planets created. What is the seed of life, and how does it create the sphere? I am your host, Matias Estefano. In this episode, we will learn how the planets were created and who were the first beings that created souls. 12,000 years ago, I was living in Rukni Rassor. It was a region in the north of Egypt. We call all the region Kem, and the river Nile was called Tulfa, the Great Flow. And we had these two regions that we call the motherland. In the north, Rukni Rassor. In the south, Ruhnuba. Both of them were representative of the spirit and the body. Those regions had just one spot in which both of them were connected. We call this place Hayat-Tur. Hayat-Tur means the tree of life. And that spot was the core of the soul of the whole river. This spot is today known as Abydos Temple, or Osirian temple, which is behind the Abydos temple in Egypt. This spot there was the core of the whole system of schooling, where we were teaching people and learning from people the 7 laws of the universe and about every dimension. We had no idea how exactly give the information to others, to new generations. So we started to paint it in walls. We started to try to understand the concept of reality through painting our hands, through painting animals on the walls, and then to create hieroglyphics, to carve on the stones, and then to write in a paper those carvings and those drawings. So since 30 or 50,000 years ago, we've learned to understand the world in a second dimension. People from the inner world and other dimensions like the 4th, the 5th, the 6th dimension used to give us all the data from the other dimensions in a way we could see it better and we could understand it. That's why in many countries, mostly in England, you can see these crop circles all around that make these beautiful drawings in 2 dimensions, but they are indeed in 3 dimensions and 4 dimensions, moving around and spinning in spheres. We understood that we were multidimensional beings. So we start to teach and to learn that the information is not something in just 2 dimensions, that is something in many other dimensions. And that's why the whole information of the universe was explained by architecture. In our civilization, they built these monuments like temples, pyramids, that were not just pyramids, they were spheres. They were the projection of spheres in the 3D matter. The pyramids are this octahedron, in one part physical, in one part ethereal, so they can create the 5th dimension and 6th dimension, and in the core, the 1st one, the 7th, and the 9th. And if you connect every spot of the pyramid, you can have the sphere, the perfect sphere, where connects the whole sphere of life. So we could go within the whole sphere, and in the core, with this darkness of the chambers, we could connect with every dimension, just one spot and in one moment. But we knew and we realized that a lot of people that were being born into a new era, they couldn't understand exactly what it meant to be inside of a sphere with the shape of a pyramid. So my civilization decided to write it down for the first time. The only way that other people could see the reality we were seeing in the darkness of the chambers, they could see it in paper or in the wall, like drawings where it was explained. That's why all this information about every dimension was carved very deep in the stones of Hayat Tur. That's the way we could leave all this information for those who, on seeing it, could see the three-dimensional reality of everything. That's why in Osirian, in this temple, you can find for the first time the flower of life. The flower of life is the design multiplied for many times in these stones, so you could see every dimension of not just the second dimension, but from the second dimension. The most important information that we had at that point was the division of cells, the biology as a way to bring the spiritual world to the physical world. Biology is the best way to understand the meaning of seed of life, of the fruit of life, of the flower of life, and the tree of life. It's the only way you can understand the whole information is the only way you can see and experience what we were teaching about every dimension. Is the spheres are cells creating worlds, creating life. That's why you should not stay with information in two dimensions. This is not circles. Circles just hold us trapped in one perspective of the universe. You have to see the sphere in order to understand that you have freedom into many other directions of time and space. The first physical realities were just a projection of these spheres in vibration of the soul that were dividing itself in many, many and thousands of parts that created electrons, protons, neutrons, molecular beings, and these realities that created the souls as a body. We bodies and planets are just the projection of the energy of the souls. We used to say that the universe was mind, everything was mind, and the mind created by idea the body, so the spirit could experience all their dreams. But they needed a bridge to connect this and to create the matter. So this bridge was called the soul. The soul is the core of every reality, is the bridge in between worlds. So you need emotion to understand information, you need energy to create matter. And that's why the core of everything, of the tree of life, is exactly the soul. And the soul is not something that you can see as a spirit, as a ghost. The soul is a sphere where every energy and every vibration of the universe is aware and is vibrating in different levels of consciousness. That's why souls are the way and the bridges to create life. That's why spheres are the most important structures in which you can understand the whole consciousness of the universe. In this region that we now call Egypt, we have these two circles of life that we call the spiritual one in the north and the physical one in the south, and the soul there in the middle with the shape of an eye. We know today this shape of the three realities of the universe as the Vesica Piscis. The Vesica is one circle turning into two, created in the middle like the shape of an eye. This shape of an eye, the shape of a mouth, is the shape of the universe that brings up the soul. The soul is the creation in between body and spirit, is the one that connects as a bridge. That's why we used to say the eyes are the portals or the windows to the soul. But it's not because the soul is within and behind the eyes. It's because the shape of the eye was the one that helped us to design a reality in which the spirit could experience and see the body, the matter. We have this vesica like the symbol to create every reality. So we have this circle like the sun connecting there with the spheres in the sky, and then the other circle that represents the earth with a cross in the middle representing the solstice and equinox. So both of them, when they connect in the middle, they create the consciousness. The consciousness becomes the body and the soul in the same spot. So we have this shape that has the shape of an eye, this shape that is the shape of the mouth, and also if you turn it, the shape of a vagina that is the creation of the mother. These three aspects of creation start to design the meaning of life in every reality, in every dimension. So these two circles that start to create this knowledge about the Trinity opens the portal towards the creation of everything through the duality in between positive and negative. When the first dimension starts to expand itself, it creates the first sphere, the sphere of mind. And then the positive and negative divided itself into the vesica pieces that we call the two mother cells. Then you have the seed in the middle. And from these two dimensions, we create the third dimension, which is exactly the middle in between both of them, like two spheres. And then it divided in four, which is the fourth dimension, and then in six, and then in eight. So when the whole sphere start to be created in the universe, start to divide in many other souls, which is too much energy. So these energies that start to create these branches of the tree of life, it was not physical, it was energetical. And the vibration of it in other levels of consciousness, in other levels of dimensions, start to fill all the universe and all the mind until it become the distortion. The distortion is when every light and every soul in the universe start to touch with the other one, and the colors start to reflect. So you cannot see the light, you cannot see the main light from the core. So all the rays start to reflect each other and creating this mess and this distortion that we call darkness. This distortion of darkness creates like kind of a mirror shape in which we call the mirror hole of the reality. So everything is just reflected in this mirror hole. And from that, all the energy that reach the edges of the universe in that mirrors start to reflect themselves in waves to the core of the universe again. So all this energy going out and then coming back creates such a force and energy in the core, reflecting every possibility to the center, that this seed start to be charged with so much energy that time and space start to be united and divided again. So that moment where every vibration was divided and then all the energy came back as unity, and that's the moment where everything that was created in the waves start to be created in the shapes. That's what we call the Big Bang, the moment where matter was created from the souls. When you see the pattern of the seed of life, you will see 6 spheres and 1 inside. These 6 spheres and 1 in the middle means the 7 laws of the universe, the 7 dimensions in which the reality is organized, is the core of the whole information. But when you go further and you can see beyond the second dimension, you will know that the 7th dimension is just projected to the 8th dimension behind. So you can see this pattern in 8 dimensions. When you project the other one, you will have the information of the cube that creates the whole realities, the first cube that creates the Pratikta, which we call the 9th dimension. In the core of it, you will have the void of the 9th dimension, where every connection, every reality, every consciousness holds in the center. Those spheres we call the seed because they are the basement of every reality. From these 9 spheres, you start to create the projection of other beings in other dimensions. You multiply the 9 dimensions that you can see in the seed of light, and you multiply it by 2 in the flower of life. The flower of life, you will see 18 circles, 9 positive, 9 negative. The flower after that will create the fruit of life. And the fruit of life will give us the information of the first mother cell, of the information of the whole universe being alive. This pattern will show you these 33 levels of consciousness that are held in a sphere. So you have every possible image of every reality in every dimension held in this sphere, where that is composed by many other spheres that holds cubes and chambers within each one of them. This fruit of life we call the biggest creation of souls, because these spheres are the ones that reflect the light from inside and start to spray in different, to split in different vibrations that we see as colors. This fruit of life is the one that creates the rays of light. So is the one that creates for the first time the soul. The soul is the whole energy that the spirit needs to create matter. So that's why this fruit holds the whole energy of the universe, and the soul is the one that have all information to do so. This is the moment where also the spheres in the universe start to create the families, like the clusters of beings being connected through time and space. That's what we call our spiritual family. Is the moment where the energy of the same family start to split in many others, creating a new body that we call an archangel, seraphim, a big being in which every cell is a new soul creating new bodies. We used to give to the soul human perspective, a human emotion. So that's why we project the image of a soul like if they were people with head, with hands, with feet, with eyes. But the souls are not that. That's only a projection of ourselves in the fourth dimension. But what we call ghosts or spirits. But soul doesn't have a shape. The souls are energy. You could maybe see like a rainbow or see like spheres projecting light and projecting shapes of geometry around, but without specific eyes, mouth, ears, and human shape. The first souls created were just the vibrations being born from the sounds of the universe. So the seven first vibrations were the seven first rays and colors of the universe that started to be themselves projected to every time and space. And that's why every soul first created in the universe were all the energies like in expansion as a sphere. So when they started to mix together and they started to cross and create this great sphere of life that we call the seed of life, we have this soul as beings, energetical beings, without any shape but the sphere. After that, when each one of them start to split into many others, we start to call them seraphim. A seraphim could have the shape of a sun, could have the shape of a galaxy. They are such a big beings that they can only express themselves in spheres. Spheres or spirals in the universe are the shapes of the first souls, because it's the movement of the energy of the universe. Every being that you have seen as colors around going through the shape of a spiral or the shape of a galaxy, the shape of a sun, of a planet, is part of the cells that divided this big being called seraphims, which are the biggest beings in the universe. From there, the planets were born, from those first soul that have these shapes. After that, through the division of matter, through the creation of cells, the structures of the souls and the energy of the souls start to look for new perspectives of life, in which the cells try to divide themselves in order to the gravity in time and space of each planet. And that's why we started to have many other shapes, like different spheres divided into different realities. That's why we have this shape of humans. It's not because we are similar to God or the angels. We just projected our shapes to them, but they projected their shapes to us as selves. That's why the only reality that exists is not our human shape. The only reality that exists is the spheres that created the proton, neutron, the cells. This is the only reality that exists. The rest is just a conjunction of gravity shaping these spheres towards evolution. After seraphims were created from these vibrations of spheres of souls, these new separations of the seraphims created the power and the most powerful energy that has a purpose in the creation. This power of canons in the universe were called the archangels. The archangels are not human shaped, but are like a projection of those seraphims, creating solar systems, creating patterns of geometry that condition the beings into evolution. And that's why a lot of people, we can say, we come from the energy of one archangel. And that's because we are the purpose of experience of one of the most strength forces of each one of those seraphims. So this is kind of a tree in which the ninth dimension, the first dimension, seventh dimension is the main part of the tree, and then we have these branches that we call seraphims, and then other branches coming from those that we call archangels, and then we have many other branches called angels, and then we have the leaves that we call beings alive in planets. So we are all just one sphere split in many other spheres that creates this tree of life, that creates this fruit of life. So we are the smallest spheres that were created from archangels, angels, seraphims, and the great spheres of the tree of life. It's important for you to understand what means the seed of life, the fruit of life, the tree of life, because you are that. Because within you, every sphere that you call cell is creating the body that you are in and holds information from the whole universe in every dimension possible created. So to understand the shape of this structure helps you to understand how you all were created and how you can transform yourself. When you recognize the power of the cell, the power of the DNA, the power of the atom inside of you, you start to realize that the symbols that you have seen in a spiritual way in the history as the seed or the flower of life is not just a symbol, it's biology. You are in shape, all these flowers and all these dimensions being experienced in the three-dimensional reality. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I am your host and guide, Matias Estefano, for this series on the creation of the universe. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we dive into how a spiritual being
I'm Jim Mars, and I'm here today to talk to you about our occulted history. Now, let me quickly point out that this has nothing to do with devil worship or witches or vampires or zombies, not in the occult that we normally think of it. This is the term occulted used in the astronomical sense, meaning when the moon.
You don't know where you are going.
In 1937, a podiatrist named Doc Noss discovered a cache of Apache gold on what is now the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. Scouting a rocky outcropping called Victorio Peak while deer hunting, Noss took refuge from the heavy rainstorm in a cave. Exploring, he stumbled upon an old mine shaft that led him to thousands of crudely smelted gold bars stacked in rows like bricks. Tragically, Noss was never able to cash in on this treasure because, whilst using explosives in an attempt to widen the cave's opening, he mistakenly created a landslide that sealed it forevermore. The legend of Noss's lost gold gained widespread attention. But where did the riches he had seen come from originally? Theories abound. From the repository of a 19th century Apache war chief to a secret stash from the Aztecs. Treasure hunters world over have come to Victorio's Peak to find Noss's fortune, but none have been successful. Many believe the lost treasure is still buried somewhere in rubble and possibly guarded by the military. Is it possible ancient treasure from a lost civilization lay buried beneath Victorio's Peak? And if so, what else could be beneath this strange area? Researchers like Greg Braden point out that there is more to this area than gold. There is actually a much more ancient system that stretches over 4 states.
What we found in these areas, not so much that there is a hollow space under the desert, but there is a tunnel system, a network that connects many of the indigenous traditions in this part of the world from the area in southwestern Colorado, northern New Mexico, down towards Wild Horse Mesa. And it is this natural system of caverns that the native people say many of their traditions relate to. So they were created naturally through volcanic environments, and then they were modified to become more useful over later generations. But what the ancestors say is that in the past, this is where people have lived when the cataclysms of the past destroyed the surface of the earth. And now we have physical evidence in New Mexico and Colorado. The geologic evidence does not support the hollow earth theory in the sense of a complete space in the center of the earth. It does support within the crust itself a series of tunnels and catacombs that were created naturally and have been known and used by our ancestors, by native peoples in the past.
It's interesting that we find this idea of treasures within the earth, hidden gold, and things of this nature that actually tie in with Native American lore. For instance, you have Chickamastock, the 7 caves of the 7 cities of gold from Aztec stories. You have to wonder, how much truth there is to it. At the same time, you have this whole idea that goes back to stories of the underworld containing treasure, whether it's the dwarves or it's the alchemists looking for gold in the depths of the earth.
These sites are very controversial. because they force historians to rethink the traditional story.
Could this be true? Many of these underground caverns in North America are located in the Four Corners region, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. This rugged and arid geographic land, also known as the Colorado Plateau, is predominantly owned by Native American tribes, including the Hopi Nation. In Hopi folklore, it is written that the Indians' ancestors climb onto the surface of our Earth from an underworld. This indigenous tribe believes that the current incarnation of mankind is the fourth world, and that the prior three occurred inside the Earth.
What's intriguing about the Hopi tradition is the notion of previous cycles of civilization that comes across, which are brought to an end cataclysmically, and then there's a re-emergence and another cycle of civilization occurs. That's the message that I take from the Hopi traditions, that they are urging us to cast our minds back into remote prehistory, and they're saying we are not recent comers. We lived through a series of cataclysms, and we remade the earth each time after those cataclysms. When you look at the actual structures of the ground in that area, if you go to Chaco Canyon or places like this, but there's a suggestion that we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, and that there's a much older heritage behind all of this.
If this indeed is just the tip of the iceberg to something far more mysterious, what other evidence could suggest that there is an unseen power in this area? Freddie Silva brings us to another location in the Four Corners called Shiprock.
I've seen grown men weep at the sight of Shiprock, or if you want to call it by its real name, Sebitai. And it's one of the most powerful places on Earth for a number of reasons. One, it's described as a navel of the Earth, and any place called a navel of the Earth is essentially a power point, as you'd expect from a navel. And it's a place of beginning, where the Anasazi is said to, and I quote, land here from Venus on a metal bird, and when the bird recognized that the people were safe, the bird went into the ground and rose up as Shiprock. You can see it for about 60 miles in any direction. It's a sacred spot. We should respect that. It's one of those few places on Earth where I feel I can actually hear the braves singing and dancing around me, and actually join in. It sounds like the craziest thing, but the energy is so unadulterated, so powerful, so potent, it doesn't have to show it. It is itself. And you are suddenly reminded that you're actually crossing a veil. It's hard to put into words unless you've experienced this, but that's the power of a place like that.
Could this navel of the Earth be a place where people could cross over into other dimensions?
When it comes to exploring Native American lore, and in particular legends about the underworld, the Four Corners area is particularly important because we have a number of Native American groups that claim to have emerged there. And by that, I mean they have an emergence myth that says that they came out of the earth. The Pueblo people believed that they had come out of the earth in that area, around the Grand Canyon area. We have the Hopi, who claim they came out of what they call the Sipapu, which is basically the name for the hole as part of their chimney system in Akiva. But they claim that they had to come out of something they call the Sipapu, and they had come out of the underworld, where they had interacted with reptilian humanoids called the snake people and the lizard people. And they had also interacted with another group called the ant people. The ant people are described basically in a way that sounds very much like so-called descriptions of modern-day gray aliens. We have this whole idea here that there's a series of worlds beneath, and they all have their own inhabitants, and that these Native American people said they had come up through these various regions to eventually emerge in our world. We have the Apache, who have a similar legend that says they came through a series of caverns to our world after they lived in a place called the Old Fireland, which had been destroyed in a cataclysm and had sunk beneath the ocean. And they claimed that they had come here through a series of caverns, just as the Aztecs said. We also have the Navajo, and the Navajo believe that they came out of the underworld as well. So these are themes that all tie into the Four Corners area. And it's very interesting that the various people, some of them were even adversaries in previous centuries, but they all have similar legends about worlds within our world.
If the premise that modern mankind originated from caverns deep below the earth is true, then is it also possible that there are entire civilizations still living underground in the Four Corners region?
I live near Taos, New Mexico, and there is a phenomenon that is called the hum, the Taos hum, H-U-M. It is a vibration that is felt selectively by some people. Other people don't seem to know it at all. It usually happens between 2 and 4 a.m. when a lot of people are sleeping. And the hum, it's right on the verge of where you feel it in your heart and where you can just below the audible level. And no one knows where this hum is coming from. They brought in university researchers back in the 1980s to try to triangulate where, if they could find 3 locations where they found the hum and triangulate, they could find a source. And what they found was that it's coming from everywhere, suggesting that there is a vibration happening within the earth during those periods of time, 2, 3, 4 a.m., that is being carried through the bedrock into these other areas. What is the source of that vibration? This is where the speculation comes in, that these natural tunnels and the caves and the caverns that our ancestors have talked about in the past that already exist are being modified, perhaps, and used in modern ways for storage, for earth sensing, geosensing applications, and things like that. So that is where the scientific community kind of has arrived, is that there is something that they think maybe it is the drilling, the constant drilling to modify these caverns that's creating the vibration.
Since 1946, the U.S. government has been using Hopi land in the Four Corners region for explosive testing. Is it possible that, in fact, these tests are a cover-up? Could the military be using the ancient power of this area to run covert military programs? Or could their true agenda be to destroy something that was discovered underground, perhaps something from an ancient galaxy? Billy Carson entails his personal encounter at the Four Corners area.
It appears that a lot of this activity and a lot of these tunnels congregate close to this Four Corners area. Now, there's well-known stone-based stargates, is what the ancient Indians call them, and now the modern Indians are saying these are where their relatives used to go and put their heads in and actually chant some words and disappear, and then some of them will return. Last summer, I went to Arizona to see the Grand Canyon. We actually hired a helicopter and a guide to go down there because I wanted to find out if I can see any of these ancient mysteries that people have been talking about. And we landed on this Indian reservation down inside the canyon. And there's a special area that was cordoned off. So I said to the guy, I said, why can't I come over here? I don't understand. I don't see anything dangerous. He said, because NASA has taken over this part of the canyon.
The way the grid system runs across the earth, there's several places that are just like heavily energetic nodes. You'll find on many reservations and other holy areas held by natives, you will find that military groups have gone in and built facilities and made them off limits. A lot of the time, these are actual entrances into this cavern system that honeycombs the entire earth. A lot of these places are sacred to natives because they have stories going back many millennia of different types of beings taking them below the earth before cataclysms to protect them. And these same beings, after the cataclysm, would bring them back to the surface of the earth and help them set up their civilizations again. A lot of these areas that the military will lock down also are very strong vortexes, which basically are nodes in this cosmic web Stargate system. These are places that the military want locked down because they don't want you to see what's coming and going through these gates.
A lockdown? If this is true, who or what could possibly be traveling through these gates or in these underground caverns? Perhaps we should consider one of the less conventional theories of evolution. If it is possible that the DNA of human beings was originally bioengineered by ancient terrestrials, could this be a link? William Bramley points out how this idea is explained in Hopi folklore.
You have this possibility, at least within the lore, you don't necessarily exclude skyborn gods from gods that lived underground, because people had both ideas, that the gods had realms underground, underwater, and in the sky, and they interacted with all of them. We already know there are very large caverns here and there. It may be, for example, that the South American tribe, maybe the Hopi, maybe they found some of these at one time, or at least they found caverns big enough where they believe that some of these things could transpire. So it's not necessarily a contradiction. It just means that the gods operated in these different realms.
When we look at the creation stories of our past, as different as they are from one another, there are common themes that weave them all together. I find this fascinating because it is the local understanding of a common heritage, I believe, that is preserved in the traditions of the modern indigenous peoples. One of the most obvious of these common threads is the theme of another world beneath this one, a world, subterranean world, from which our ancestors emerged.
A lot of these themes from Native American folklore have found their way into modern day accounts of what I call modern folklore, which is the ufology, cryptozoology, all these types of things, conspiracy literature. Really, all this stuff is just an update of folklore. It's the same stuff that people have done for centuries. Sometimes it contains truth, sometimes it contains fabrications, sometimes people elaborate on what they think something means. But we see these ideas of underworlds involved with variety of peoples around the world now immersion in these same areas. All these things touch on the same type of material.
With these subterranean creation stories of the world from which our ancestors emerged, is there perhaps a code or a treasure that could have been left for us to figure out the truth of humanity's connections to the four corners?
New Mexico, Arizona, the whole area around the Four Corners, and Utah, of course, and southern Colorado, it's actually one of the most spiritually active parts of North America. And this is why that part of America is it draws so many people. Some of them might know it, some of them don't, but they are drawn there nevertheless. I think it's because the land is worked with. The land is a living organism. If you work with it, just like watering a plant, it gives you something back. It gives you back a certain pleasure. And that's what you're attracted to. So that's why that part of the country is so important, because it's still alive. It's worked with on a daily basis. And you can feel that as you just drive through it. There is the Navajo sites. There is Mesa Verde as well. There is Bandelier. There's a kiva up on Bandelier that if you happen to go there at the end of the day and time it so you don't get caught up inside the park, you have to climb up a 100-foot ladder. And that place is perfectly positioned inside the natural cave in a really awkward area of the park, because that's the one spot where the Earth's telluric currents just happen to cross. And they're everywhere. These currents are everywhere. But they built this sacred site exactly where those currents cross, and you go inside the kiva, and you have this out-of-body experience, because this energy is made of the same stuff that we're made of. It's literally just giving you a means, a technology in which to escape the physical world and connect to another level of reality.
Greg Braden takes us deep into another structure in the Four Corners area that may give us an insight into how this location connects to the sky and what may lie below.
One of the greatest mysteries that we're finding of ancient civilization is right in our own backyard for those of us that live in the United States, in the high deserts of northern New Mexico, Chaco Canyon. Something happened in Chaco Canyon 1,100 plus years ago that we have never seen in the history of the world before, and we never saw it duplicated since that time. We still do not know precisely who the people were that built Chaco Canyon, where they came from, why they had the advanced technology, why they had the mathematics, why they had the astronomy, the architecture, the ability to grow food in one of the most harshest environments. It's 12 miles long, 2 miles wide in some places. Within the canyon itself, there are over 2,800 archaeological sites that have been recognized. Of those 2,800, 32
have been excavated, and because they cannot be sustained, many of them were reburied to preserve them for later generations. 12 are now restored, and it's those 12 that are telling the story, that is opening the door to forbidden territory when it comes to archaeology, advanced civilizations of our past. One of the most notable places in Chaco Canyon is Pueblo Bonito. It is a very unique D-shaped architectural complex. Over 900 rooms were built into this Pueblo Bonito. Some of them are square, some of them are the circular chambers, the kivas, that play such a significant role in the traditions of the native peoples throughout the desert Southwest. And one of the reasons that the circular chamber is so important is because it ties directly into their creation story. In the circular chambers, in the kivas, there was a place at one end of the kiva called the sipapu. And the sipapu, in the native traditions, is where our ancestors from the past emerged from another world beneath this world. They emerge into this world time and time again. This ties in beautifully to some of the creation stories that we find everywhere from Sumeria to the Mesoamerican traditions in the Yucatan. There's a common theme that runs through all of these stories, and that common theme is that the people emerge from a world that is underneath, it is below the world that we know now.
Is this yet another reference to human creation beneath the surface? What might be Chaco Canyon's connection to the stars?
When the Viking missions began sending back the images from Mars, over 19,000 images from the orbiter as it was circling. And as those images now have been refined and we have a better sense of what they are, lo and behold, there is on the surface of Mars a temple complex that looks precisely like an unexcavated Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, the very unique D-shaped structure that we find nowhere else on this planet in the past. It's nothing that we find contemporary. The only other place we find an example of this structure is on the surface of Mars. Now, the people of Chaco Canyon, we don't know, as I mentioned, precisely who they are, but we know that they had an advanced understanding of physics, of astronomy, and mathematics. There was a place in Chaco, a 400-foot tall butte called Fajada Butte. And at the top of Fajada Butte is a mysterious structure that scientists are now calling the North American Stonehenge. Now, you wouldn't necessarily know that to look at it because there are 3 vertical slabs made of the same material as the native Earth. In the 1970s, it was recognized that on the solstice and on the equinox, the way the sun comes and the light shines through these slabs against a spiral design on the wall at the back of the slabs, it actually pinpoints precisely the summer solstice and the equinox, as well as lunar cycles. And this was something that has never been seen before. It's so rare that scientists were reluctant to even embrace the possibility that it was actually happening. And it was only when laser-guided imagery was used to mimic the solstices and the equinoxes at different times of year that scientists were able to pinpoint precisely that, yes, this is what was happening on Fajada Butte.
If the Four Corners area holds some kind of power beneath the earth that humans might have emerged from, is it possible that the inhabitants of Chaco Canyon built these locations to connect with an ancient spacefaring race beyond Earth?
What the scientists found was that from Chaco Canyon were a series of roads that radiate in perfect lines from Chaco into other archaeological sites like Jovenhuip and Mesa Verde, for example, the Aztec National Monument. Perfect lines, perfect roads. When they reached a rock or a boulder in the middle of the road, they didn't go around. They went right up over. They're absolutely perfect. And part of the reason this is a mystery is because these people had no wheels. What were they using? A perfect road, absolutely straight, 36 inches wide with no wheels
in their culture? What were they using these roads for? This is one of the mysteries that the scientists are looking at now, because it appears that Chaco was never inhabited to the full extent that it could have been. It had the ability to sustain thousands and thousands of people, but there's no evidence that those thousands of people ever lived there. So now the thinking is that it was a gathering place during very specific times that were predicted and calculated by Fajada Butte, where people from the other traditions would converge on Chaco using these roads. And many of the astronomical images that we're seeing now link Chaco to what we see happening in Venus, what we see happening on Mars. So it's very possible that what we're seeing in Chaco Canyon is an example of an advanced technology using the materials that are available in this world to mimic and duplicate a knowledge and a wisdom that has been known from somewhere in the past.
Could Chaco Canyon be mimicking something more ancient than we know today? Andrew Collins suggests that the ancient people were following a pathway of the skies that would lead them home. Is it possible these ancient people had a different understanding of their existence here?
The soul comes from, let's say, the sky world up there somewhere and returns there at the point of death. But there's something more beyond that, that some part of us comes from the stars themselves. And that at the point of incarnation, that something, we call it the soul or the spirit, is embodied within flesh and blood and exists. And that this gives us this connection to the stars, that the soul or spirit actually comes from an extraterrestrial or a starry source. And that when we're released at the point of death, it goes back from whence it came. But in connection with this were various stars that were seen as personification of influences and intelligences that were either markers on that route to reach the sky world, or helped or enabled the soul as supernatural beings to achieve that aim. There seems to be a consistent route, and that route would seem to have been, symbolically at least, and maybe in actuality in some manner, connected with the Milky Way, what we can see of the edge of the Milky Way, this bright, beautiful, starry stream that comes up from the horizon, goes, arches over our heads, down to the other horizon. Something that we barely perceive today, living in urban environments for the most part. But if you go to, remote parts of the world, its totality, and it's beautiful, and you don't understand just how important this would have been to our ancestors, seeing something like this rising up into the sky. And the ancestors believed that this was the route. They called it the path of souls in Native American tradition.
If these ancient people did have this knowledge, how is this connected to what might lie below the four corners?
Breakaway civilizations and things of that nature. Ancient civilizations like pre-Adamites, if these beings created a high level of civilization before we did, and long ago have reached quantum computing levels, even using the crystalline structure of the earth itself to achieve godlike powers. And hence they became the gods to a lot of ancient people. So when you look at these ancient beings that are described in the ancient text, and you look at the modern day UFO accounts, you're probably really looking at the same beings. But that does not mean that they're coming from across the galaxy. There's a good bit of evidence that the Earth has been bombarded by various cataclysms over the ages. Everything from asteroid impact to solar events. When these things happen, civilizations that might be on the surface are going to be devastating. There's really no way around this. If you don't know it's coming, then the effect on your civilization is going to be catastrophic. We find this again and again in stories about these ancient beings who preceded us here on the planet and who may still actually be here. Richard Shaver, who is the creator of something called the Shaver Mystery, he said that these beings fled underground. When the radiation coming from the sun became so deadly, whereas before they lived for thousands of years, they quickly found that solar radiation was destroying their DNA, and then they fled beneath the surface of the earth. And they and their descendants, in a greatly modified form due to other types of radiation, which are found inside the earth, are still there to this day. That's not to say that you would have to have a really advanced level of not just civilization, but technology in order to carve out a space inside the crust of the planet and to make a sustainable environment there. And of course, there are elements there which could provide this.
Sonia Grace uses her alternative research to dive even deeper into the layers of the Four Corners.
So I went back in time and spirit traveled to an ancient site that my guides took me to called Chaco Canyon. It's in the Four Corners of the Southwest. The Savrak immediately ushered us inside the rocks. There was like an opening and we went inside and they said, we want to show you this because this is what happened to the Anasazi people. We took them through this underground tunnel and we literally returned the people that we could to the very place that they began before they migrated north, which was to the Mayan culture. The Savrak helped the Mayan people long time before that. The whole migration story of the Hopis, where they migrated in 4 directions, came out of an ancient culture down in Mexico. And this was very interesting that the Savrak would intervene and help some of these people back to this place. It's how they actually disappeared. The rest of them disappeared because the Anunnaki also came and took several of these people, hundreds of them, from the Anasazi community. This site and all of the Southwest is filled with portals. There's all kinds of energy going on there, especially extraterrestrial energy. There's all kinds of energy in the Southwest.
Could it be that what Doc Noss apparently stumbled across was ancient treasure from some of these cultures as they survived cataclysms? Is it possible that the Four Corners area holds a certain kind of energy that opens up doorways to other worlds? If this is true, how are Mayans and ancient cultures in Mexico attached to this area in the American Southwest?
The foundation of the Aztec nation. Now that location was known as Chicomostoc. That means the 7 caves. And this was like some kind of subterranean structure. One of them has them coming from a place called Aztlan. And this is suggested to be somewhere in the Southwest United States.
Could the mysterious Four Corners be linked to more ancient cultures that migrated south? Could this have been the location of the creation story for the Aztecs? Up next, the code continues to unravel as we head south of the border to Mexico. Aztlan. According to legend, this was the home and the creation of a people called the Mexica, otherwise known as the Aztecs in our history books. This legendary home has been mentioned in several ethno-historical sources that were taken from ancient Aztec priests. It depicts lists of different tribal groups that lived with the Aztecs, as well as a very significant migration from Aztlan to central Mexico. If this place existed, this might suggest that the Aztecs were part of a very ancient civilization, thousands of years before they came into power in Mexico. The trail of breadcrumbs begins at, arguably, the time of Atlantis.
The Mexica or Aztecs have various traditions about their point of origin and about the timing of this event. Some of them have no dates at all and probably go back many, many thousands of years, arguably even to the time of Atlantis, 11,500 years ago.
If we go back about 11,000 years ago, we're talking about a time of an enormous flood suddenly overwhelmed the Earth, huge catastrophe. There was fire came out from the sky, parts of a meteorite crashed upon the Earth, and this changed the whole structure of the Earth as we know it today. We're talking about a huge story of multiple nations who survived in small numbers this huge catastrophe 11,000 years ago, and then populated the tribes that we know today. So the Anasazi, the Hopi, the Navajo, the Aztec, who then became the Mexica. All of these peoples are little sort of crumbs of original people that survived a very ancient catastrophe.
Could a cataclysm 11,000 years ago have spurred a migration of mass proportions that separated these tribes into different areas? The legend of the Aztecs suggests that their people began their journey from a red canyon with 4 rivers. Dr. Cecilio Orozco of California State University, Fresno, set out to confirm the actual location of Aztlan. On March 24, 1990, Dr. Orozco published an astonishing conclusion. By cross-referencing the description of the land where the Mexica came from, Orozco was able to pinpoint the location of their homeland, Utah. More specifically, the Four Corners region, where the borders of Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico all converge.
He came across a glyph that was a dead-on perfect representation of an Aztec glyph that he knew of, that contained a mathematical code, and that mathematical code alludes to the Venusian cycle, the cycle of Venus. Because of that, he decided that the Four Corners area must be their place of origin. The Nahua people, which is where the Aztecs came from, also claim that they came from a place of the 4 great waters. Well, in the Four Corner region, you have the 4 great waters. You have the Green River coming out of Wyoming, the Colorado River coming out of Colorado, the San Juan River, with the 3 main rivers and then mixing together. That's the 4 great waters that they were discussing.
When people started trying to understand what was the source of the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Anasazi, the Hopi, were they related? Were there different streams? One of the interesting parts of this was the mythology behind the Aztecs, that their origin source was a place where there were 4 rivers that intersected.
If there are several tribes reported to be from this ancient area, does this also mean they originated from the same knowledge? There was another interesting clue that Dr. Orozco and his team found. They suggested that these symbols represented the Venusian cycle and are also connected to one of the Aztec gods, Quetzalcoatl.
Quetzalcoatl was the astrological equivalent of Venus. And when you study ancient cultures, the movements of Venus are extremely important for not only the planting of crops, but they could tell the cycles of time from the movements of Venus. The movements of Venus around our star are so precise that you can literally time everything by them in a society or a culture. And when you look at the ancient Egyptian culture and the Sumerian culture, the movements of Venus always take on an extremely important role.
So it's highly probable that, yes, there are certain symbols in certain caves around Utah that do specifically tie in with a lot of the Mayan calendars, a lot of their images of Quetzalcoatl, one of their central god figures. But at the same time, these symbols are also shared by other cultures as well. So they're not just inherent in the Aztec culture, they're also shared by the Anasazi and the Hopi, the Navajo, the Apache, and so forth.
Is Quetzalcoatl the missing link in the mystery of Aztlan? And could his symbol be universal in the lineage of all the different civilizations of ancient America and possibly ancient Sumer? Author Anton Parks believes Quetzalcoatl could have an ancient link to the Sumerian god Enki. Based on his research, he discovered that Enki left Sumer and resided in Egypt. When he came to Egypt, he became Osiris. According to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Osiris was then killed by Set and resurrected by his wife Isis as the son Horus. Horus then revenges his father's death.
Sumérien et également égyptien. Horus profite de la venue de Vénus dans le ciel pour livrer bataille. Ça, c'est un point.
In some Sumerian texts, but also in Egyptian ones, Horus takes advantage of the fact that Venus appears in the sky to start the fight. That is interesting because the link between Horus and Venus is quite clear. Horus manages to defeat Set in an epic battle. When Horus finally defeats Set, he completely disappears from Egyptian texts. I think that I found his trace in America, near Mexico, under the name Quetzalcoatl. I think that he wanted to leave the Sumerian and Egyptian gods' heavy atmosphere to create his own community where he will be called Quetzalcoatl. We also find traces of him a little further down, such as in Peru, under the name Viracocha. I believe when he flees to America, he isolates himself, he transforms into this wise character, has a whole community around him, and he calls himself Quetzalcoatl.
Among the Aztecs, whose beliefs are the best documented in many historical sources, Quetzalcoatl was related to gods of the wind, of the planet Venus, of the dawn, and of crafts and knowledge.
Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent, the feathered serpent, is the civilizer deity of ancient Central America. He's remembered most for that, for bringing the gifts of civilization, and for teaching a doctrine of peace and love.
Quetzalcoatl essentially becomes a father figure to humanity. He shows people how to do things properly, how to build temples, how to navigate, how to basically set the motions in life that create a fundamental basis from which you can adapt a very civilized lifestyle.
The earliest iconographic depiction of the deity is believed to be found on Stela 19 at the Olmec site of La Venta, depicting a serpent rising up behind a person probably engaged in a shamanic ritual. This depiction is believed to have been made around 900 BC.
His teachings oppose human sacrifice, and he seeks to teach humanity you must not kill fellow human beings. That's a terrible crime. If you want to sacrifice, sacrifice flowers, sacrifice fruits. This is the peaceful and beautiful teaching of Quetzalcoatl. And it's fascinating that the earliest image of Quetzalcoatl does come from the Olmec site of La Venta, where we see this figure that is called man in serpent, where you see the coiled figure of a serpent with the plume, with the feathered head, and within it a man holding one of those man bags that we find in Sumer and we find in Göbekli Tepe and elsewhere.
The idea of Quetzalcoatl as a serpent being seemed to be apparent in such groups as the Incas and the Mayans. Is this more proof that they all were influenced by the same god? How then did the Aztecs twist the teachings and the wisdom? Graham Hancock suggests that according to the legend, another prominent god then steps in to drive out Quetzalcoatl and assume leadership of the Aztecs.
You see, Quetzalcoatl, after performing his civilizing mission in Central America, the traditions, the myths tell us that he was driven out of the region. And as he leaves, he promises that he will return, and that he will overthrow the cult of the war god.
Who was this usurper? The war god, Huitzilopochtli.
He's a very dark god, to be honest. And yet, in contrast, you have Quetzalcoatl. Now, he's the feathered serpent. his colours are bright, blues and greens, and he was a vegetarian, and he did all the good things. He civilized the world. So it's almost like there's some kind of dualism going on between these two gods.
Quetzalcoatl's antagonist is Huitzilopochtli. You can translate his name as hummingbird. We think of hummingbirds as very sweet little things, but they're very determined and they're very fast, they are a perfect symbol of the manifestation of will, the ability of a hummingbird to stay still in one place with its wings moving at incredibly high speed. So it's perhaps not surprising that something apparently pretty like the hummingbird is chosen as the avatar of the god of war.
Where did this god come from? Could this be another otherworldly being inserting itself into the programming of the Aztec culture? Originally, he was of little importance before the migration to Mexico. But after Quetzalcoatl's departure, the Aztecs reformed their religion and put Huitzilopochtli at the same level as Quetzalcoatl, making him a solar god. It is Huitzilopochtli that directed the Aztecs to leave Aztlan and find a new home. Huitzilopochtli also left specific instructions on how they would find their new home.
When you listen to what the Aztec elders say today, was that the leader of the tribe, before they left Aztlan, had a vision. In the vision, a god appeared to him and told him that he had to travel south with the tribe till they came across an eagle sitting on a barbed tree eating a snake. And eventually they made their way into Central America. And what they found was an eagle sitting on a cactus, and it was literally eating a snake. And they took that as the sign of where they were going to settle.
And this is indeed apparently what they saw on this journey. They saw this cactus, they saw the bird, and in its talons was this snake. And this is where they stopped. And it was in a middle of a lake, an island in the middle of a lake. And this is where they built this great city, which became the center of the Aztec Empire.
Built on the fertile island of Lago de Texcoco, the great city became known as Tenochtitlan. Today, this is the site of the bustling metropolis, Mexico City. If the imagery of an eagle eating a serpent feels familiar, the symbol is used today on Mexico's flag. But could it have a much more ancient meaning? Some scholars, like Jack Carey, believe this symbol is rooted in an ancient conflict between otherworldly forces.
Perhaps it was a time when the ancient serpent lineage became lesser than this new royal bloodline that had emerged as the Aztec royalty.
They continue to worship the god of war, and over the next few hundred years, their empire thrives, despite an increase in bloodshed and the use of human sacrifice.
What's fascinating is that eventually the Aztecs take on human sacrifice as a way of appeasing this god. They tell us that they were sacrificing humans in order to retard the movement of the sun into the next zodiac house. That is the precessional movement of our sun. Why they were trying to retard the movement of the sun into the next zodiac house was because it was this movement that they equated with being the mechanism that caused global calamity on the earth. They thought by appeasing the sun through human ritual sacrifice, they could slow its movement down in such a way that they could avoid the next global cataclysm.
They believed Huitzilopochtli was in a constant struggle with the darkness and required nourishment in the form of sacrifices to ensure the sun would survive the cycle of 52 years, which was the basis of many Mesoamerican myths.
They sort of somehow began to misread the ancient teachings, what the ancient concept of the gods were there for. They were there as metaphors, they were there as teaching aids to help, the individual rise above his or her own, base living situation. It was about raising your level of awareness. What the Aztecs began to do, which is often what happens with so many old cultures, they began to take these things literally. So when they start looking at their war god and saying, I am your war god. In order for the Aztec to go on being who they are and go on surviving for thousands of years, if you appease me by doing blood sacrifices and ritual, I will make sure that you're protected from future darkness. You will always be protected from darkness. The evil spirits will never come and infiltrate your lives ever again.
I feel that the Aztec were terrified that their gods had left them. And so this act of violence, this killing people and, sacrificing people to appease the gods, it's a practice that we've seen in many places around the planet. And I feel that they felt abandoned by everyone. They were angry about it. And this was their way of showing the world that they were powerful, even though they were very fearful.
But could their fear of darkness have finally caught up with them? Not even their precious God could have saved them from what was about to happen next. In 1519, a ship arrives on their shores, and a strange, white, bearded man introduces himself.
And eventually Cortez comes to the Aztec people, and the only other time that they had seen a creature with a beard was on their god Quetzalcoatl. And here is a Spaniard wearing a long beard with amazing armor, and they were riding these incredible creatures, the horses that they brought with them.
When Cortez comes on those beaches and has a beard and is white-skinned and hair, so the people who have been worshiping and waiting for Quetzalcoatl, they transfer their energies to Cortez, and Cortez from Europe, and he's not a god.
Led by his faith, the Aztec Emperor Montezuma initially greets Cortez and his conquistadors with open arms.
He's thrown into a state of hysteria by the arrival of Cortez. It's fascinating looking at the documents from the period. Both the Aztecs and the conquistadors kept the detailed records to get a sense of the state of mind of Moctezuma. How terrified. He was a bully. He was an aggressive, domineering dictator. But when he thought he was facing a returning god, his knees turned to water. He ceased to have any courage or confidence whatsoever. And Cortez very quickly learned about this and took advantage of it and played upon it and used it as part of his psychological game to overthrow the Aztec Empire and take from them everything that they had. Of course, Cortez was no god of peace. Cortez was no Quetzalcoatl. Cortez was only there for one thing. He was there to take everything they had. He was there to destroy utterly their culture. But he took advantage of and rode upon that myth on his way in. And in the first encounter, the direct encounter between Moctezuma and Cortez, this matter is raised directly, and Moctezuma asks him, "Are you truly Quetzalcoatl?" And Cortez actually says, "No, I'm not." But you see, he was being clever there, because the deities of ancient Mexico were tricksters. So that's exactly what Moctezuma would expect him to say. "Yes, you are Quetzalcoatl." Moctezuma did the work in his own imagination. It's a very curious and extraordinary moment in human history, seen at the time as the fulfillment of a prophecy. But what was it really? It was the doom. It was the doom of the ancient cultures of Central America.
What was really at play here? Was it the belief in certain gods as more powerful than themselves? Or could the demise of the Aztec people by Cortez in 1519 have been a battle for humanity based on warring extraterrestrial forces still at play in our world thousands of years later? Could the killing off of a great civilization be the last remnants of ancient knowledge practiced on the planet? The evidence of ancient powers still at work can be reflected by an internal search that the Spanish priesthood performed. They were very concerned with how this civilization fit into their understanding of God and creation, and they sent missionaries to Mexico to dissect it. Could their creation stories be linked? These concerns may have arisen from research documents like the Auban Codex, which was compiled by a Dominican friar named Diego Duran in the late 1500s.
Yes, the discovery of the Aben Codex and its resulting translation showed an extremely close similarity between the Sumerian creation stories of the Mesoamerica people. And those creation stories speak of a pantheon of gods who ended up creating man, not a single god, as was being professed by the church at that time. And because of that, a lot of the information was suppressed. They saw such close similarities between the two that to a lot of them, they sort of scared them and said, oh my gosh, when people see the similarities, they're going to think, well, mankind was created by these creatures, by the Anunnaki, by the serpent gods, and not by the one true God in Christianity.
What would happen to the belief systems of the world if we realized we came from the same creation? And even more disturbing, what if these belief systems were being used by warring races for their own agenda?
One of the most shocking discussions I ever had in my professional career was in New York City in 1984. And I got a phone call at my office one day from a man. We had a discussion about the ancient civilizations on Earth, including the Garden of Eden, that had nothing to do with Homo sapiens sapiens. It all had to do with extraterrestrials. And extraterrestrials that were in war. I was shocked at the level and depth at which this man told me details tying our ancient civilization to extraterrestrials who warred with each other, and that we ourselves may be concerned about the return of any of them.
If this is true, is there more evidence of a secret agenda in the research these priests did? More intriguing parallels can be found in a Spanish research document written by Friar Bernardino Sahagún during the 1500s. Known as the Florentine Codex, it also details the history and culture of the Aztecs. Based on decades of research compiled by Sahagún, the document reached some startling conclusions. So startling, in fact, that the Florentine Codex was never published.
Let's put this into context. We're in the middle of the medieval era in Europe. So we have a culture that's based on plunder, destruction, and complete subjugation by a particular religious order. From this culture emerges a group of Spanish people who right all the way across the Atlantic, they land in Central America, and they are totally amazed to find that these supposed morons and barbarians, and they were barbarians, by the way. I mean, human sacrifice is not an enlightening thing, but they found, quite to their amazement, that their stories and their myths actually sounded very much like the stuff that was already in the Bible, which back in Europe was the high point of civilization. Okay, so they began to write these things down, and the more they wrote and the more they listened to the Aztecs, the more they realized that their myth really preceded Christianity. Now we have a problem, because when you start describing the god Quetzalcoatl, who basically was born of a virgin in a cave, he goes AWOL for 40 days into the wilderness, goes on top of a sacred hill, preaches religion to the masses, then is nailed figuratively to a cross, not literally, gets up 3 days later after he crosses into the other world around the 21st of December and is resurrected as a god-man, after which he's deified as a hero. That story was already around. So being a priest in the middle of all of this, I would have gone, oh dear, oh Susanna, we have a bit of a problem, Houston, because now it means that everything that's in the Bible, everything that we've been worshipping in Europe is actually much, much older. So they put one and one together and they realized, my God, this stuff is almost like what the Sumerians were saying in 3000 BC.
The Codex is presented to the church, but predictably, they wanted nothing to do with it.
So not only today, we begin to realize that the old world, as we call it, was actually much more ahead than what Europe was professing at the time.
Could the ancient knowledge from Quetzalcoatl have been given to the Aztecs? If so, did the Aztecs pervert this knowledge? And could another influence have stepped in, disguised as the war god Huitzilopochtli? If this is true, is this more proof that the demise of the Aztecs might have been played out by a supernatural and otherworldly force left behind by these gods?
We have to ask ourselves, is it possible that these two beings who allegedly came from the stars are actually two otherworldly beings in conflict? Is it possible that we're looking at two creatures who are not friendly towards each other? Is it possible that we're actually looking at two different deities or two different otherworldly beings? In my opinion, and if we take a look at ancient texts, mythology, and everything the ancient Aztecs and Mayans left behind, the answer is a yes.
A possible takeaway from the destruction of these people and their culture could be that there are greater forces on Earth battling behind the scenes, manipulating our societies and turning them against each other. Could the need for Quetzalcoatl and his ancient lineage have become extinct at some point? And could the fear of the unknown have invited another type of otherworldly force on this planet? If we are always waiting for a new force to guide us, like the arrival of Cortez seen as a god, are we missing the human potential to create a new world by the understanding that we are all connected to the same creation? If we return to ancient lineages like the legend of Aslan, do we find more answers? Experts like Freddie Silva point to a connection to a star system that has infiltrated almost all ancient civilizations.
In terms of the connection to Sirius, is the fact that Sirius was always regarded as a source of wisdom, of high wisdom. Whether it was brought here through shamanic means or by actual physical beings that came here from Sirius, that's not the matter. I think both lines of inquiry are actually true.
Could there be an even more ancient lineage trying to change the human code? Up next, we trace the Sirius connection from a tribe in Mali to the mystery schools of Egypt.
Oh my.
In 1961, approximately 60 miles west of Marrakesh, Morocco, a barite mining operation at the Jebel Erhoud Massif turned up a fossil human skull. The unusual skull was classified as Homo sapiens and eventually was dated to roughly 160,000 years ago. But to most scientists, this was still a mystery, as the Jebel Erhoud fossils and skulls looked much more primitive than even the older Homo sapiens. This stayed a mystery until 2017, when paleoanthropologist Jean-Jacques Hublin and his team from the Max Planck Institute opened the cave where it was found for investigation. They were surprised to find even more skulls, as well as tools. These tools, according to their research, dated to around 300,000 years ago. If the fossils do in fact represent Homo sapiens, as the team argues, the finds push back the origin of our species by more than 100,000 years and challenge certain ideals. But the findings also shed some light on human brain development by these early humans and why they might look a little different.
It is within the variability of living humans. The main differences relate to the shape. So it's a brain which is much less globular, it's more elongated. There are parts of the brain that are less developed than what they are in today's people, like, for example, the cerebellum, which is a part of the brain which is underneath in the back.
The cerebellum accounts for 10% of the organ's total volume, but contains more than 50% of its neurons. It's been assumed that its functions were strictly to coordinate activities like standing and breathing. But in 2017, neuroscientists from Stanford University discovered that it plays a role in reward response, one of the main drives that motivate and shape human behavior. How could this part of the brain actually help frame humanity? The team at the Max Planck Institute finds this discovery interesting, as they believe this early human skull shows that the brain developed certain areas of conscious awareness over time, and not all at once. What could have prompted a change in human behavior and connectedness over the course of history? And more importantly, what kind of understanding of our reality helped us form our idea of our place in the universe? Several thousand miles south of the Jebel Irhoud cave resides a tribe with some interesting information on their development.
The Dogon tribe of West Africa were discovered in 1935 by two French anthropologists, Grial and Dieterlen were their names. These two anthropologists eventually gained the respect of the Dogon shaman and were allowed to hear their sacred knowledge. What amazed these anthropologists was that the Dogon tribe possessed knowledge of the Sirius star system that no ancient people should ever have possessed. The Dogon tribe told them that not only was there a relationship between Sirius and our star, but they claimed that a group of what could only be described as alien creatures called the Nomos descended down to Earth, and that this group of beings imparted to them the knowledge that they then possessed about the Sirius star system. What they couldn't understand was how it was they had knowledge of a Sirius B, which is a white dwarf star. It's the smallest form of visible star that we know of, and we can barely see it with modern day telescopes. And yet they knew of its absolute existence, and they called it Potolo, which is a tiny seed found in West Africa. And they said it's a tiny star, but it's the heaviest thing that there is. Well, they were alluding to the fact that white dwarf stars have some of the highest density of any stellar bodies that we know of. And that's not something an ancient people should have known anything about. They even spoke of a Sirius C, yet another stellar body in the Sirius star system, something which wasn't proven to be true until 1995, a full 60 years after the discovery of this tribe.
Is it possible the Dogon tribe were taught certain understandings of the universe by beings from Sirius? If so, who were these strange beings called the Nomos, and how did they influence a species?
The most interesting thing that I found about the Dogon tribe is that they highly revere twins. They believe that each man and woman is born with both genders. They have an amazing understanding of duality.
The creation story of the Dogon is absolutely wonderful. They basically found that in the beginning there was this almighty entity called Amma. Suspiciously close to Amun, he sets up and creates the twins. The first set of twins that came out of the earth came out a little bit early, so they were considered to be imperfect, and that came to symbolize the human race. But there's another group of twins that came out that were absolutely perfect, and they were called the Nomo. And the Nomo basically were these sort of